Excellent. Hi. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the SAP Press Book Club. And today we're doing SAP SD, and which is great because we have not covered this topic. Here we are. And if you don't know me, I'm Kendall Tyler. I am the host of the SAP Press Book Club. And today we have two authors with us. We have James Olcott and Jon Simmonds. So hey, say hi, guys.
Hey everyone, how you doing?
Hello there. I know. So what we're going to do, I'll let everybody know. So you hang out with us. So the first couple minutes, I'm going to chat with them about some of the really cool things between ECC and S4 as it relates to SD. So I know you guys want to listen to that. And then they're going to give you some tips and tricks of things that they've encountered on the way. And then also, then we'll open it up to a Q&A and you can ask your own question. So get ready for them and try to catch them up on what they know, what they don't know, because these two guys have been in SAP SD for a long time. So they pretty much know a lot. So let's introduce the two. So James, why don't you give us a quick intro? Who are you?
Well, please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a SAP consultant of a certain age. I've been active in this since 1998. I stumbled into SAP really as a result of a prior experience where I was dealing with a very complicated patent management software system in the 80s and 90s that had a header section on the top of the screen and a line item section at the bottom half of the screen. Does that sound familiar? I hope for most everyone here that they should say, oh yes, that sounds very familiar, James. Thank you for that. So when I saw SAP software for the first time, I immediately recognized the duality between a header and a line item section. And then as I got to use the software, it resonated with me in terms of all the business school principles that I had learned in school. In other words, the SAP software expressed best practices in business processes through software. And so I immediately, understood what it was trying to do. And then from there, I've gone on to work 25 different projects. You can see by my background that I'm here outside of Worcester, Massachusetts, with my current client who has graciously allowed me to borrow this conference room and speak to.
Well, it looks like you're in outer space, not in a conference room. So
people have said that to me often, particularly on weekend evenings. But right now, I've got my feet grounded and
good.
Strictly down to earth.
All right, perfect. Okay, so now we also have Jon, and Jon, tell us where you're sitting, and not in outer space, but he's where?
Hey Kendall, yes, so I am sitting in the UK, and I'm right now actually I am in Glasgow, Scotland, and that's not my normal base. I'm usually based in the south of England near Winchester, but I'm up in Scotland because we have a big ERP project going on here. Actually not SAP, but branching out my wings a little into other areas. But
how dare you? Don't you?
I know, I'm such a traitor. But in terms of
the king on you, the new king.
I know. I've been in ERP for almost as long as James. Probably about 99 was my first ERP experience. Didn't really get into SAP until 2003 when the company I was working for implemented an SAP project. I was customer service manager at the time, so took a little sidestep into the project as a data implementation manager. The SD guy who was the SD lead in the project left halfway through the project, so I was taken on, trained up, and certified in SD. The rest is kind of history. Since then, worked for a few different clients in media industry and most recently in life sciences. And so, James, you mentioned 25 projects. I haven't actually counted. It's probably somewhere around the 15 mark, I'm going to guess. I don't know. But yeah. So yeah.
blurring after a while, doesn't it?
I know, yeah. And I don't really, I don't know if I want to count back that far.
I know. And so because, all three of us really are the ancients, grew up through the, James and I, we were comparing notes from the R2 days up. And so, a lot of you guys are on ECC. They have not made the jump to S4. And, you can get very comfortable on ECC. You're there, it's stable, but, there's always the what is the difference kind of thing. And I think from your point of view, what is the biggest difference between SAP ECC and S4HANA?
Do you want me to take that one, James?
Yeah.
So I can say,
I'll go quickly first. I think Jon has a lot more to say on this. I'm working presently in a SAP GUI environment. So, for me, S4HANA looks very similar to what we see in ECC. Not a whole hell of a lot of differences with one exception, and Jon's going to jump on that in terms of business partners, which has been completely revamped. But aside from that area, one could say that the S4HANA looks, smells, feels very similar to what we're used to seeing in ECC. And after Jon's comments, I'll circle back to there seems to be, some resistance by certain customers to upgrade to S4HANA, and we can talk about that after Jon gives his version. He's going to talk more about Fiori. Am I right?
You are spot on, right, James? Yeah. So Fiori is pretty close to my heart. I've done a fair amount of work as an architect in this space, and I think if I think about SD in SAP, this is the biggest change. So Fiori, so there's a user interface. It's completely different from the SAP GUI, and there's a couple of key differences I'd like to highlight. So when you talk about SAP GUI, we're all used to, and we know and love all those transactions, VAO1, etc., all those kind of guys. That's still around. All that's available in Fiori, and all. Yeah,
you don't have to pay. You don't have to go Fiori.
You don't have to.
You can just go S4, no Fiori.
You really can, and people do that. And I think, James, that's the project you're on now, right?
Correct. Yeah, the SAP GUI. There's no interest in Fiori at all. I should ask them what happens, but it's all SAP GUI.
There's a couple of call outs on that though. Clients are missing a trick if they don't go with Fiori. There's three kind of three apps, Fiori apps, types of Fiori app you can get. And these are key. So there's the transactional app, which is the ones that we know and love, the VAO1, all that create sales order, all that display sales order, all that kind of stuff. There's also fact sheet apps, and these are really key. So these are apps that you can dive into that will give you an overview of maybe a sales order or deliveries or whatever. And the third one, which is the really, really exciting stuff, and this is the analytical apps.
Yeah. Now,
these are the ones which if you don't go with Fiori, you're really missing out on, because it gives you a kind of it's a push model. I like to call it a push model. So Fiori pushes the work out to you instead of you going and find it. So in a traditional GUI environment, you go into and you might run a report to show you all your incomplete sales orders, for example. With Fiori, you can get that right on your launch pad. You can get that as a tile with a number of incomplete orders, maybe restricted to your name or whatever. And you can go into, there's some key apps like My Sales Overview is a great one, where you can go in and you can restrict what you see in terms of a number of sales orders coming in, revenue, number of returns, all that kind of stuff, all in graphical format. And you can and you have double click technology to go right into it and all the way down to the nth degree, And so all that stuff is provided as standard in SAP. So for me, that's the number one change that we see for SD, and it kind of pains my heart, James, that I hear you're at an S4 project without Fiori.
Well, I do see it on a couple of my S4 projects where they're not using much in the way of Fiori, and in those cases where I have used Fiori, let me play devil's advocate with it, Jon. To use a Game of Thrones reference, I'm going to be a snark and a grumpkin on this. You know, I've noticed when I've used Fiori, I'll type in, you know, the app that I'm looking for, and the lag in response for, you know, going through the browser interface. Sometimes I'll type out the name of the app in full, complete, and it doesn't recognize. It'll just sit there and look at me blankly until I have to type it in once, twice, three times. As a New Yorker, I grow old, you know, like, and I say to myself, you know, why? Yeah, it's nice and fancy, and you can, you know, run SAP on your apps and so on. But, you know, that's a significant. Has that been addressed?
Yeah, and that's a common complaint actually about Fiori. I think in the later versions of SAP, the later iterations and the later versions of Fiori, certainly in Fiori 3, a lot of that lag has been addressed. I know you and I, James, have encountered this when we fired up our own SAP system.
Correct.
I wonder if Rise is different with
it would help
to that.
Yeah. It would help in that region. And then there's a couple of SAP have released a few SAP notes now to address some of this. And one of the guys I would recommend that everyone follows on LinkedIn or on the SAP blogs is a lady called Jocelyn Dart. Jocelyn she's a Fiori expert. She works for SAP, and she's always posting about the new innovations, new things in SAP. She's done a really good blog quite recently about the top 10 things you can do to address performance issues.
I wonder if she's written a book.
Yeah, exactly. She should have done. Yeah.
Can you put her name in the chat, please?
Yeah. Can we put a name in the chat? I don't know if I have access to the chat facility.
But we will email that out.
Yeah. Okay. But she's think about. When we come to think about Fiori, one of the things which is really important is that SAP have already announced that a lot of the innovations that they're going to bring out in the next few years are going to be focused on Fiori, and we already see that. So if we think about some of the things in that used to be in foreign trade in SD, and some of the things, for example, in legal control, and those kind of things. They've moved out some of that to GTS, but the stuff that's left is in a section called international trade, and that is only available through Fiori apps. So you cannot get to it from GUI. And I think we're going to see more of that as we go through, which is why I think it's really key that people, when they think about I
wonder if customers had already customized their systems with that, but didn't realize that if they standard.
Yeah, well, you of course all the customization you do in the back end anyway in the GUI, but the transactions that you use, there just aren't any transactions. They're all Fiori apps to go in and look at all the error messages and set up the licensing and the embargoes and all that kind of stuff is all controlled through Fiori apps.
Interesting.
So yeah, we were talking about differences between.
Yeah.
James, tell me your experience of business partners.
Well, this does take a little bit of getting used to if you're migrating from ECC. You have a completely new transaction code that you have to use to get into it. Gone are the days of BD03 and XD03 or XK 0123, etc. Now you're going into a single place. With respect to your business partners, you have a very important drop list on the top that you're not familiar with from ECC. You better let that become one of your new best friends. And you're also advised to learn how to use the search functionality so that you can quickly access your business partners of interest. Note that what they've done with business partners is they've created a whole subsection devoted to this. And once you input a business partner, you can assign different roles to that business partner. So it's actually a very useful upgrade and elegant solution to the whole concept of who are you dealing with and what roles and functions are they serving for you? It's very easy to take a business partner and assign both roles, customer and vendor, just by making a few quick assignments. And then you have very specialized business roles for tax collection agency, for example, is another one that you'll see. And there's like 25. How many are there, John? 25, 30?
I've no idea, James. Yeah, you're probably right. It must be around that.
But I would think that's huge. That's big with SD. I mean, just having that, I mean, that's like a big game changer.
Well, I think the reason, I understand the reason why SAP have done it. It brings the ERP landscape into line with CRM, SAP CRM, which has been using business partners for years. And in fact, actually, business partners have been around for a long time. The first SAP client I ever worked with, that was a 4.7 system, and they used business partners in the ERP system, in the GUI. So it's been around for a long time, but of course, everyone's.
It was in CRM though, wasn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One of the other things I wanted to mention, actually, when we come to customers and business partners, and again, this is around Fiori. One of the beauties of Fiori, and I love this bit. So they have a function in Fiori called the enterprise search, and it's just a search box at the top of Fiori, top right, and you can search there. And because it's running on a HANA database, it's really fast. The search is really fast. But you can search by apps, or you can search by customers or documents, all different types of objects within SAP. But you can also search by everything. So you could put a name in there, for example, and search the entire system, and it will come up with customers, vendors, documents, everything, the whole lot, and search it. And what I found really, really useful in the clients I've been working with is that they use that when they have a client on the phone, a customer on the phone, they'll type the customer's name in, it'll come up, and then when they look at that customer, there's a little link down there next to it called Customer 360 Degrees. And if you click on that, it takes you into another Fiori app called the 360 Degree app, and that will show you everything to do with that customer, all the sales areas it's assigned to, all the returns, all the quotes, all the invoices, the whole lot. So it's a really, really useful way of interacting with the customer while on the phone, and that's not available in the GUI.
And also, the business partner functionality is not optional, it's mandatory.
Correct. Yeah, there's a couple of things like that. So a few more changes to the SD landscape. Credit management's undergone a pretty hefty change. There's really simple credit management you can use, but if you want to use the more complex credit management roles, then that's completely changed. Rebates, gone are the days of the old SD rebates. We now have settlement management to do all that. So yeah, a lot of
gone are certain tables like BSEG and KONP. They're replaced now by, of course, BSEG is replaced by the huge table OCDACA, which consolidates all of your accounts receivable and post-billing information. And KONP was replaced by PRC underscore something else to maintain your pricing data.
Yeah.
So really, it's actually become much easier in SD to get the client, track the sales, track where they're shipping, and have they paid? Has it been invoiced? Have they paid? And have they, the whole process is easier to understand.
Well, that's the idea. I mean, if you're using Fiori, and to your point, James, if your Fiori connection is pretty quick, then absolutely, yes, that can be a lot easier. But the trick is with Fiori is, and this is something that clients often overlook, is you need to put some time in as an SAP consultant to set up your Fiori Launchpad in the right way, because it's a role-based Launchpad. So one person logging on as a customer service advisor would see something different from a credit controller, for example. And you've got to put some work in to get that. I mean, SAP will give you some standard roles, but you've got to put some work in to customize those roles correctly to your own business. Makes
sense. Yeah, you got to get it all set up. And then what other, I think those were the biggest ones, were the Fiori. But then, I'm trying to think of, so when you guys tried to figure out like how to start the book, how to, did you actually think about like, what are they going to live? What do they want to hear? That kind of thing. Is it, or did you come up with how are we going to present this? Because I love the part of the book where you start off with, how did this all come about? Because you guys went into the history of SAP, you know, how it started back in the early 70s. And I was shocked that you guys found the very first customer, you know, that SAP had and so forth. So was it trying to explain to everybody, like, here's where we first started and this is kind of where we're going, and by the way, and then you guys went into here's what it is now? I mean, is that kind of how did y'all come up with that?
I think, you know, you've hit the nail on the head. The purpose of the book is to explain to business users the how, why, and what of SAP is. And I think it's always important to lay the foundation and explain the context in any discussion that we have, no matter what the topic is. If you don't have context, you're on shifting ground. And so we needed to explain the context of what SAP is, how it started. It was a very human story. You know, 4 guys working for IBM in Germany. They had the idea of creating a dual entry accounting system.
Five guys. But,
it's 5 guys. Did I leave out somebody?
Like the burgers, 5 guys.
5 guys. Yeah.
Okay.
So like
they just
I said,
had their 50th anniversary party.
Right. Like I said, there were 5 guys, and they devised the system. They sold it to ICI, and then they decided, you know, they didn't really need to stay working with IBM much longer, and they branched off and then created the other modules. And you know, with that backstory, we built on that to explain the origins as well as certain features and functions of the SAP system, and to give an explanation or a rationale as to why this is the #1 ERP software on this planet today, and since the beginning, is the quality of their work. So based on that background, then the next thing to explain is SD. What is SD? SD is everything having to do with the customer. Yeah. So we start with the business, with the basic business flow. What is a basic flow in SD? Well, it starts with the inquiry, and then you have the quotation, the sales order, delivery, post-goods issue, the billing document, and then as a special bonus, I insisted, and Jon readily agreed with me on this, that we have a reversal matrix. What happens when you make? Yeah,
I love that, James.
Yeah, you know, what happens when you have a mistake? You know, to err is to be human. I think someone in your country, Jon, wrote that 400 years ago. What do you do when you have a mistake? Well, there's a process for that, and we have a complete explanation of what to do when you hit certain errors in your data entry at different points in the process, and how exactly to roll it back. SAP has a reputation for being, you know, somewhat rigid, stands for the fist. And you know, it has an unfriendly reputation. But if you understand why the program has certain restrictions, you know, we remind the kind reader that, you know, it's based on accounting principles. You know, thou shalt not put garbage into your business system. You know, this is the 11th commandment that's written in one of the religious texts. So, you know, you need to be cognizant of that. Once you understand what those restrictions are, you tend to think less of SAP as the monster in Jabba the Hutt's basement, but rather more like a cuddly, playful, fluffy kitten that just needs to be fed a couple of times a day, and you can, you know, pat it, and it appreciates your attention.
Well, I like that you wrote the book for a business user. It could be a business, you know, it could be somebody that's just, you know, on the team that maybe is not doing SD, but it's kind of interested. Or it could be a manager. It could be a sales guy. It could be a recruiter. It could be anyone.
Right. It's not written.
Book and understand it.
It's not written for a database engineer. And as a matter of fact, I've had database engineers come up to me and say, you know, your writing, and this goes beyond the book. They say to me, your writing is too simplistic. You know, you write for dummies. And I say to them, excuse me, not everyone is born as a database engineer. You know, some of us mortals are actually business users, and we come into this from a different perspective. That's what we're trying to explain and express. And certainly, as a trainer, one thing I focus on as a soft skill is to install confidence in the user.
Yeah.
You can understand this. You can understand the relationships, and you can perform these transactions with just a bit of context and explanation. Jon?
I like also that, you know, if you're SD and if you're working in a certain industry, like services, you're not experiencing the other side of all these other things within SD. So it's a great way to, like, say, expand your view of it and get into a manufacturing kind of company and be able to, you know, because a lot of people are so pigeonholed into one specific thing in SD, big companies.
Yeah, I think that's true. And we've all got our favorite little areas of SD. And James and I are often texting each other or saying, have you come across this or whatever? Because, you know, we know we've got different areas, different strengths. And you know what it's like when you see an SD job and it asks for all this stuff, all these requirements. I don't think that person exists. So I want to call out to all the SD consultants out there. You're not on your own by having your strengths and weaknesses in this area. And you know what we wanted to do by writing this book is, as a business user, you know, you can find out what's behind the myth of SD, what's behind the myth of SAP, and that it's not rocket science. It's really actually follows some really fundamental, structured, logical processes. And there's certain things like, you know, if you understand pricing and the way pricing works and the condition technique, and you're halfway to understanding SD, because that whole flow is replicated throughout the whole module of SD.
I actually have one of our listeners here is asking, is there any loss of functionality from R3 to SAP S/4HANA?
Loss of functionality?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, actually, there is, actually. So the one that jumps to mind straight away is foreign trade. So foreign trade has always been within SD. And there's additional things in there, like licenses that we talked about earlier. Some of that has been moved to the international trade area of S/4HANA, but most of the foreign trade stuff is now in SAP GTS. So SAP really want you as a client to implement the global trade solutions module or add-on that they have. It's pretty expensive. It's not for everyone. So what they in the early years of S/4HANA, you know, they put the whole lot, all of foreign trade into GTS. I think there was a bit of a mutiny with.
I was going to say, back in R3, you got everything, didn't you?
Yeah, exactly.
You didn't even know what you had, and didn't even install it.
Yeah. And so they brought some of the key functions back in to core SD. The other one, which is kind of SD, I suppose, but some might argue it's a little bit on the extreme end of distribution, is warehouse management.
Oh yeah,
and you've got warehouse management in S/4HANA, but it's only supported until the end of 2025. And so what you need to try and build in, and what the recommended path is extended warehouse management, EWM, which comes in various different forms, and I'm not really going to go into that. You know, embedded or decentralized EWM and all that kind of stuff. And SAP have worked pretty hard to bring in some more basic functionality, so you haven't got to do this massive monolithic EWM system which sits externally from the core of SAP. So those are a couple of things that are deprecated, I guess, within the.
May I add something? And this is, you know, at the risk of being self-evident, you know, all those customizations you have in ECC, the Z functionality, your Z tables, your Z fields, guess what? Bye-bye, they're gone. You have to replicate all that stuff into S/4HANA when you migrate over. And despite, you know, this adds you know, quite a bit of extra cost to your migration to S/4HANA. And I opened my comments at the top of the hour with that there is some resistance to S/4HANA. And I know that there are a lot of companies out there still running ECC that have yet to make the necessary jump to S/4HANA. You know, typically it's cost related, but in some cases, some of these companies running ECC are at risk. I know of one in particular that will not be named in this call that is adding right now much additional Z functionality to their ECC system. Careful with that. Your legacy system, what is it? Today's system is tomorrow's legacy system.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to convert all of that to S/4HANA once the ECC support runs out, which is currently set for 2027. They keep pushing this back a little bit to accommodate the customer base, but obviously you need to be very careful with pursuing enhancements in ECC. You're very well advised to make the jump into S/4HANA first, and then do all that work. So you only have to do it once. Why?
Yeah, I think James, that it follows the market trend in ERP to try and keep your core clean.
Yes.
And so SAP are following that trend with things like RISE. Kendall, we talked about RISE.
Yes, we want to talk about RISE. Yes.
So let's talk about RISE. Yes. Okay, so for those of you who don't know what RISE is, RISE with SAP is a new offering from SAP, and there's a couple of things differently from what we would traditionally expect from an SAP client. So the first thing is the licensing model is different. Mm-hmm. So where in traditional ECC world, your licensing would be per user. You'd pay an upfront cost to buy the license, and then a maintenance cost, which is a percentage of that. With RISE, it's a subscription service, and so that can come with a few different things. The most common and the way that SAP want you to go is the software as a service, and so that's where you are implementing essentially what is a vanilla SAP system, and they'll give you some customizations which you can do, some little tweaks, but generally you can't do any development within that system.
No. Because
you can have it on a private cloud or a public cloud, so it could be just owned by you, or it could be in the public domain. All the infrastructure, the hosting, the disaster recovery, all that stuff is managed by SAP. So that's the platform as a service section. But if you go for the software as a service, then you have that S/4HANA cloud, and you actually can't do all those Z customizations. Now, there is something called the Business Technology Platform, SAP BTP, mm-hmm. Which is an add-on, used to be called the SAP Cloud Platform. And
yeah, we just did a book on that one.
Yeah, that's right.
That was our last one. That was great.
Yeah. I watched that. It was great.
BTP is really cool.
Yeah, and what BTP allows you to do is there's a whole ton of standard integrations within BTP in their integration suite, but there's an extension suite in there as well. So you can do all that customizations that you would normally do in your core, you do in BTP, and that allows you to keep your core clean.
Yes.
Which is great, because what that means is, if you're on a software as a service with RISE, you get that quarterly update, which just happens. So you get all the new functionality, which just suddenly appears overnight, every quarter, mm-hmm. which is really helpful, because I've worked in clients before where you just build up this technical debt because you haven't done any upgrades for so many years. And then you get to a point where, as you said, James, you've got all these Z customizations, and it's just too difficult, too expensive, too painful to do that upgrade. And so the appetite's gone, and you've lost that opportunity. With RISE and with that software as a service on S/4HANA Cloud, you haven't got to worry about that. It's all done for you. That's the marketing pitch that SAP tell you.
So what are we losing in SD? Any functionality if we go to RISE?
Yeah, so I suppose that's the wrong end of the stick, put it politely. when you go with RISE, is you don't have that ability to do that customization, and that's the key point. So you don't really own the system,
right?
So you can implement that system based on some guardrails that SAP give you, some parameters that SAP give you, and if you take a standard on-premise S/4HANA system and use without customizations, and then you line it up against an S/4HANA cloud, it's pretty much the same system.
Okay.
But as soon as you start customizing in your S/4HANA in your S/4HANA on-premise system, then you can't do that.
You just got to really just take what they give you.
You have, yeah. I mean, there are some things you can do in BTP and that kind of thing, but and this is why there's this kind of in the market is this is gathering pace, the cloud, because it's so quick and easy to, and upgrades happen, and the implementation of a S/4HANA cloud with RISE is really fast. And we're talking about weeks instead of months, or even years sometimes on the big end, on the big on-premise solutions. But yeah, I've heard of implementations in 10, 12 weeks. They're really impressive.
Too funny. All right, everybody. So now's the time you can ask the two authors questions. So send in your questions into the chat, and let's see what we can come up with, if we can trick anybody up. All right, so we already got one. Here's the first one. Is RISE referring to a service offering for S4, or is it a different product by itself? In these cases of service, who owns the data? Do customers have access to their data?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so there's a number of flavors of different flavors of RISE, and this is the whole point: is it can be as flexible as you like. So the ultimate base for RISE is it's a subscription. You pay a subscription service, and that's your licensing model, is a subscription year on year. And actually, if you do compare it with the traditional licensing, it is pretty competitive. Mm-hmm. The different flavors come when you start thinking, all right, what's the add-ons to this? And normally you'd start as your base with that subscription license, and all your infrastructure and your hosting and all that kind of thing is controlled by SAP. So that's your base. What your options is from there on are, you can implement RISE as software as a service, mm-hmm. and that's normally on an S/4HANA cloud, and that's where pretty much everything about the system is owned by SAP. Now you still own your data, and this can be on a private cloud or a public cloud, so it can be one of the hyperscalers, AWS or Azure or all those guys.
Yeah.
And so you still own your data, and it's still your system, but you have real limitations on what you can do with it in terms of customizations. What you can do, though, is you can take the RISE option as a platform as a service, mm-hmm. in which case, essentially, you are treating your system like it's an on-premise system. You can do as much customization to it as you like. It's your system, but that's not an S/4HANA cloud. So it's still a subscription, but only in the license model and the basis and infrastructure and hosting side.
Right.
Everything else you own like it's an on-premise system. And so those are the two different flavors, and I've seen both of them work quite effectively.
Yeah, and now they're doing industry, RISE different industries within
Absolutely.
RISE. So
yeah, that's really key.
Yeah, your industry, and then it has different things within it, so you're not, if it's a retail version or, I don't know.
Oil and gas, whatever, yeah.
Oil and gas or
utilities, yeah, all that stuff, yeah. I think there's about, off the top of my head, I think it's about 29, 30 industries, something like that, yeah.
Yeah, I know I see them adding new industries all the time. So if it's not in there, it'll be there. It'll come eventually.
Yeah, and there's another thing that SAP offers, which is like a model company, mm-hmm. which is where it's very similar to an industry solution. You select, you can go into their webpage and you can select a model company, and that comes with its own pre-configuration. It comes with its own test data, test scripts, all that stuff, and it's all built into Solution Manager. And so you can string all that together, which makes the implementations that much quicker and easier.
Here's a good question for us. So, how do you think the book can help a functional consultant that comes from another module to improve? So he is a SRM consultant.
I think our book would speak very clearly and be a great reference aid for anyone coming in from other modules. There shouldn't really be any mystery to SD, and I think that's one of the points of our book, Jon. I think you'll agree, is to demystify the whole process and explain how we as an enterprise relate to our customers by issuing them various documents of the sales variety, whether it's inquiry, quotations, and sales orders. Once all that's done, we have to ship them the goods and then invoice them. And then from there, we go into the various details. So I think the book is meant as a guide in a couple of ways. You know, you can read the book from cover to cover if you're interested in all the permutations. But, you know, if you're short on time, the book serves very well as a reference document. You know, even though I wrote, you know, chapter 6, for example, I look at chapter 6 all the time because I don't think about plant determination every single day when I'm serving as a SAP consultant. But occasionally I'll get questions about plant determination, you know, and so it's fresh in my mind now. There are 3 levels to it. But some of the other determinations have 5 levels, 6 levels. And so I'll refer to it just so I can get caught up to date and refreshed. And I think the book serves wonderfully as a helpful reference. Pick it up, come to the page that you need, and read the basic details and background of the process you're interested in SD.
And also this week, you get 20% off on your book. So if you do this week only, it's fall 22 is the code, promo code. Put that in and you get 20% off. And then on Monday, no more 20, we're going to book club 15. And if you do put that in, you get 15% off on their book. So one of our we have another question here that I'm looking for configuration books for settlement management in AATP. Any references? As this, both areas are, you know, are always improving. He's trying to improve within that.
Is there an SAP Press book on this, Kendall?
Settlement management?
Or ATP?
You know, there might be some like
bite size.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think there might be. There's so we cover settlement management in the book, but from a business user perspective, of course, which is a good place to start for it actually. There is the sales certification book, which I was involved in actually, which does cover the configuration for both those areas, advanced ATP and settlement management. So yes.
Okay, good. Let's see. Here was one. Do you have any information on the automotive industry solution?
So I don't know about you, James, but I've never worked in the automotive industry.
I've worked in related industries, such as the rubber gaskets that form the seal between the doors and the exterior of the vehicle. Yeah, that's a little bit outside of our wheelhouse for this conversation. Yes, there are references, and you know, Google is a handy thing, but it's a little bit outside of our topic here, I think.
Here's one. Is there any information on SD going to tie into the federal requirement for G invoicing?
Wow. Well, I'm just a lowly European. I'm not going to know about that, so that might be your area, James.
Yeah, that sounds to me to be a very specific industry solution. If you're working with government, selling them things, you're going to have to comply with certain requirements that come from them, and that will depend on the government. For example, I've worked for the government of the province of Quebec. You know, there's a requirement that everything be in French, for example. You know, that's one of their requirements. I've worked for another client that did a lot of government and defense. So they had a very specific requirement for certain invoices going to government that just had pricing on a summarized level, not detailed. You know, that's the requirement. Government was only getting like one price. You would take all of the different sub prices, total it, and government would see on their quotations and invoices one price, as opposed to if you are looking at the billing document or the sales document under the conditions, you can see all the details. But for this particular government requirement, they were just going to provide one price, and that was you know what they wanted to do. So I think that it depends on your government. You're going to have many different types of requirements. There, I worked for the state of New York. There, they had different you know, requirements. They had different systems. They had to have a grant management system, for example. that get far and above what you see in the private industry. So a lot of variety over there. And I think they're very specific solutions that you need to look at.
I think one of the things, just to finish up on that, James, one of the things to focus on there is SAP are actually really good about releasing information when those regulations come up. And it's always on, if you go to the SAP help, look at the SAP notes. It used to be called OSS notes back in the day, but they're always very, very good. And there's another thing called, one of the tips I always say is Google something called SAP Hot News. And there's you can go and you'll need an SAP username, but if you go in there, SAP release new functionality, well, new requirements, new regulatory requirements, and SAP notes relating to that under that SAP Hot News. And that was really useful for things like we had an implementation where we had to change our system for Brexit, because that was a last minute change with 7 days notice over Christmas. And so we were very, very active on SAP Hot News. A lot of those notes were released really, really last minute. We had to implement them all at 300 notes or something. It was crazy. But yeah, I would recommend that's, as a good consultant, SAP Hot News is your friend.
Are there any improvements to the inbox for processing workflow items? Today, it's slow, cumbersome to work item related to sales orders. Example, order iDocs that errored out, order pricing, workflow approvals.
So yeah, there's a couple of things. There's something called flexible workflow in SAP S/4HANA. I haven't personally used it, but it's unique to S/4HANA. It's something that the business users can configure themselves rather than the IT team. So, which is a big step, a big advance. Another thing when we come to think about iDocs is, this is not actually an S/4HANA enhancement. This came with some of the later enhancement packs in ECC. There's a transaction called WLF_iDoc, and that's a cockpit. And it's available in Fiori and in the GUI. It's a cockpit and everything you can get to see about iDocs. You can start your own batch jobs to reprocess them. You can get alerts. All that kind of stuff is available within that cockpit.
Excellent. So what were some of the challenges you faced when migrating customer master data from ECC to S/4HANA when on a brownfield implementation with regards to business partners?
So there are, go on, James.
Yeah, I would say that the mapping, I think, gets to be somewhat complicated when you're taking your customers from ECC into S/4HANA. Like I said, the functionality in S/4HANA is very robust and will call for a lot of decisions. Jon, do you want to add something else to that?
Yeah, the challenge is that there's a strict set of requirements and a process you have to follow. So when you are mapping from a brownfield, you need to put your configuration one way, so it goes from customers to business partners, and then you move across in your source system to business partners. And then when you do the step into your new S/4HANA box, you need to put the configuration back the other way, so you go from business partners to customers. Because of course, when you create a business partner and save it in S/4HANA, it saves it into the back-end customer tables, the tables like KNA1, KNVV, all those guys that we know and love from ECC. And so you need to point that configuration in that way. The other thing you need to do is there's some configuration settings to ensure that the business partner number is the same as the customer number that's saved. So
yeah, one thing that someone's asking here is that, can you actually literally copy all the functionality from an ECC over customized system into S4? I was going to say, no, you can't do that.
No. And James, you mentioned this earlier about the table changes, right? Yeah. So if you've got a whole load of development in your ECC system, that's likely to reference tables that are not used any longer. So
greenfield implementation at that point, people.
Yeah, yep. VSEG and KONP, those are very important tables in ECC. They don't exist anymore in S/4HANA. So careful there.
Yeah, definitely roadmap your
You
system.
can, I mean, when you do I can't remember what it's called now, is it a Pathfinder report? I think that SAP will do for you, and they'll identify when you're doing a conversion, they'll identify all of the developments that you have and all of the changes that you need to make to those developments, and they give you little tools that you can supposedly press a button and make the fix, but obviously it's not.
Yeah, that doesn't work. I was like, oh, sometimes I would suggest going to some of these companies that provide, like, how you get your data, what's an ABAP, trying to figure it out, and because it is a mess, like you said.
And this is
a lot of migration questions, huh, Kendall?
Yeah, it's a big migration question.
But this is what scares people off, right, James? About migrating to S4.
Well, they're literally, that's when they're like, is it a green field? Is it a brown field? What is it? Is it a mix? Sometimes it is. But I'm trying.
Migration is always a beast.
Yeah, and SmartShift is a company I would look at if you guys are, it literally, like, you dump in all your entire, system, it spits out, these are your ABAP that you don't need. This is the customization you did. You don't need it. It's already in S4. So look at that. It's a company called SmartShift. It really would help as far as, road mapping your journey and so forth. So here's the next one. What comes next for SD after S4HANA?
Got to be yours, James.
Can you think of something really exciting?
There's a reason why we're laughing. There's a reason why we're laughing, and James is going to fill you in now.
Oh, good. Okay.
I've written a little bit about this because I have a unique perspective. I was actually invited to the secret laboratory under the SAP headquarters building in Waldorf a year and a half ago. I wrote about it on LinkedIn. My critics claim that just like Carlos Castaneda fabricated his anthropology PhD for UCLA, they claim that it's not really true. Under the advice of attorneys, I can't directly address that. But what I can say is this: you went from R3 to S4. So what comes next after S4HANA? What in 10, 15 years? What will we be talking about? Well, we'll be talking about upgrading, of course, to T5 Mona, which is the new system. And I kind of give some ideas. I consider myself somewhat of a futurist. Yes. And if you read my articles on LinkedIn, I talk about some of the functionalities that SAP is working on, like linking your coffee machine to your SAP T5 Mona system, using hand gestures to control SAP to facilitate your sales documents, deliveries, and billing documents.
Will it do facial expressions? Would that be anyway?
For one thing at a time, I think you're talking about the one after T5 Mona, which is going to be called, I think, U6 Uranus. But that's still vaporware. We're not there yet. But for example, we have the big table ACT-DACA in S4HANA. Well, what comes next in the T5 Mona? Well, you'll have only one data table to serve them all. It's going to be called DATACA. That's the working name in Waldorf. So, there's lots of things to contemplate about the future.
You guys need to literally Google James, and you will read. He has an entire blog about what he thinks the future holds. Well, his secret knowledge of the next version, and it's so you have to go find it. I read it.
Now that you've read that, of course, I have to kill you because it is secret. So, if you do happen to stumble across it on the internet, keep it to yourselves. Okay, it's secret.
I know.
I will tell you though, in all seriousness, not that you're not serious, James, but in all seriousness, I think when you mentioned about hand gestures and creating sales orders and everything, I saw at the TechEd conference. This was a couple of years ago, in fact, 2019, the year before COVID struck. I saw there a demonstration of artificial intelligence with SD. And so what it was an engineer, a field service engineer that came to replace a spare part in an instrument he was servicing. Didn't know, he wanted to order this spare part. took a photograph of it and uploaded the photograph on his mobile to SAP, and they had a photo recognition software, recognized the part number and automatically create a sales order for it. So that's already around.
Yeah. So my vision of the future is that we're all going to be in a video game. We're going to have our own little person that we make, create an avatar.
Yeah.
And then we're going to walk around, and we'll walk into the finance department, do what we want, walk around into, and I think that's going to be the future. And we'll all, because we all work remote. So this way we'll interact with each other in our little virtual avatar way.
I'm going to call you Morbius from now on, Kendall.
I'm telling you, I think that's going to be you wait. We'll all have our own avatars.
Absolutely.
But thank you guys. Thank you everyone for coming. This was wonderful. And definitely check out the book. Here it is, SAP SD. Remember, it is 20% off today and tomorrow, fall 20. And then it'll be 15% off on Monday forward, book club 15. So thanks again. Thank you, James. Thank you, Jon. And thank you, everyone. And everyone have a great day. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for attending. Yes.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye.